Hospital for just car sickness? We don't need that. Although he prioritizes father-daughter trips over work, my daughter always looks exhausted when she comes home. One day, after returning from a trip, my daughter looked pale, so I asked if she needed to go to the hospital. Then my husband raised his voice, saying, "No need for that." When he asked our daughter if she agreed, she slightly shivered and nodded. "We won't go to the hospital. Just let her sleep, she'll be fine." But as I insisted, my husband, annoyed, snatched our daughter's insurance card and left the house, saying he didn't want her taken to the hospital without him. 3 days later, my daughter's conditions suddenly worsened, and at the hospital, she was found to be in a critical state. Upon returning home, I found police surrounding my husband, trying to shove him into a patrol car. As a child, during a family trip, I had a near-death experience while traveling. I am alive today thanks to a nurse on board. The hospital where I was taken initially provided excellent care, saving my life, as my parents told me later. I wanted to thank her, but the nurse, who had introduced herself, moved on to another patient, and I never got her name. From that experience, I dreamed of becoming a nurse to meet my lifesaver again and to be like the nurse who helped me. So I vowed to continue nursing even after getting married and having children. That was a non-negotiable belief of mine. After becoming a nurse, life was incredibly busy, leaving no time for a boyfriend. I thought if my life ended unmarried, I'd have no regrets. Nursing felt like a calling, but it was someone unconventional who pursued me vigorously because of this. He is now my husband. My husband was younger and used to visit the hospital selling medical equipment. Initially, he earned less than I did, so we both worked hard for a while. In my 20s, I wanted to have a child, but I sealed that desire away, fearing it would pressure my husband. Perhaps that was wrong, as later his hard work was recognized at work, leading to promotions and a higher income than mine. He then suggested, given his earnings, that we could start a family. I was overjoyed, yet strangely, I struggled to conceive. Finally, in my mid-30s, I successfully became pregnant, and my husband, overly protective and worried, cherished me throughout the pregnancy. I was deeply grateful for meeting, marrying, and having a daughter with him. I felt overwhelmingly happy, almost unsure if I deserved such joy. Our daughter was incredibly adorable, inheriting the best traits from both of us, making me proud even if others called me doting. My husband actively participated in parenting, being the ideal partner. Thanks to him, I returned to work sooner than expected, requesting a transfer to a daytime shift with more flexible hours, which was readily approved. My in-laws, living nearby, were very understanding of our working parent status, allowing us to rely on them when necessary. I felt immensely fortunate for this supportive environment. When our daughter started kindergarten, my husband suggested it might be time for her to start some educational lessons outside school. I remembered hearing from nurse colleagues that kids these days often start learning second language in kindergarten. The thought of my daughter needing to start such activities made me weary. A lesson is something that will not last long unless the person in question is interested in it. This was true in my childhood. My grandparents thought that since I was a girl, I should be given girly lessons, but my parents often argued that I should be allowed to do what I wanted to do. Eventually, I never took up any hobbies except for a tutoring school for exams. So, I didn't plan to force my daughter into anything unless she showed interest. Yet my husband's ideas were surprisingly similar to my grandparents. Since you're a girl, how about piano, flower arrangement, or ballroom dancing? Ballroom dancing? Not ballet? My husband says that ballet is too vulgar for a girl in tights and lifting her legs. I want my daughter to grow up to be neat and pretty. I don't want her to expose her skin to an unspecified number of men. For my part, I think it is best for children to grow up in a carefree environment. It would be better if they could study and play sports a little, but I don't intend to force them to do so. However, it is good for them to learn some sports because it is good for their health and immune system. When I was a child, I had a hard time in pool because I couldn't swim. So I suggested she might try swimming for now, but he rejected it, citing concerns about too much skin exposure in a swimsuit. Eventually, we agreed not to enroll her in any lessons during kindergarten, as forcing activities on her at such a young age seemed unwise. Differing views on a child's education are common, settled by advice from experienced mothers and my husband's parenting finished superiors. Our daughter made many friends in kindergarten, always laughing and playing, growing up healthily. She has become so well known as a beautiful girl in the street, and even to us, her parents, she has become a beautiful face. In elementary school, she became interested in piano as her close friends started lessons, leading her to start as well. Buying a grand piano was impossible, but my husband, without consulting me, bought a used one. This led to a mild argument, witnessed by our daughter, making her feel obligated to continue. I believed it was better to wait until she was genuinely engaged before purchasing. A compact electronic piano would have sufficed. She continued piano lessons until graduating from elementary school, more out of obligation to her father than passion. She wasn't particularly talented in piano, nor strong enough for competitions. She participated in school recitals, mainly to please her father, even though younger children often performed better. When she entered middle school and her piano teacher closed the studio, she quit piano. She then focused on school clubs and studying, aiming for a high school she wanted to attend. Seeing her find and pursue her interests, I resumed night shifts, returning to my original department and shift pattern before maternity leave. With my husband still finishing work on time, I could commit to night shifts without worry. I'm very grateful to him. During her elementary years, my husband had restricted her from sports, fearing injury, especially ball games, even requesting her teachers to excuse her from such activities at school. Entering middle school, she eagerly joined the popular softball team. Though she was slim in elementary school, she's now eating well, growing stronger, and her tan skin radiates health. My husband, seeing her thrive in softball, stopped insisting on traditionally feminine activities. 2 months into middle school, a rift began to form in our family. It started when even on my off nights, dinner was separately prepared for me. My daughter and I will handle our dinner. You can eat whatever you like, my husband said. Then I'll join you for the meal you've prepared. You want to take over the meal I prepared for my daughter? I didn't mean that. After a few such exchanges, it became the norm for me to eat alone, regardless of how early I returned home, as they would have finished their meal. On weekends, my husband began taking our daughter on trips. We couldn't travel much during her piano days in elementary school, so I want her to make up for it. What about me? You should just work as much as you like. Nursing is your calling, right? You wouldn't take off work for a trip, would you? It's your calling, after all, you shouldn't take a break. My husband used my passionate speech about nursing before we got married to justify not taking me on trips. Indeed, I could immerse myself in work when my husband and daughter were away. Initially, I followed my husband's suggestion to work night shifts on weekends, but it became an issue that I was always the one working those shifts. Everyone should equally share weekend night shifts. It's unfair for the same person to always work them. Once the shift schedule was adjusted, I found myself alone at home on weekends, which felt incredibly lonely and made time seem to drag on. As my daughter's summer vacation began, my husband not only took weekends off but also started taking weekdays off to travel more frequently with her. Sometimes overnight or day trips, often without telling me. Around 1/3 into the summer break, they returned from a day trip, and my daughter looked very sick, pale, and bloodless. What happened? You look really unwell. It's just car sickness. I suggested staying overnight, but she insisted on coming home. It's her own doing. I couldn't understand how he could treat our beloved daughter so coldly. Feeling distrustful of his attitude, I decided to check on my daughter directly. Knocking on her room's door, I got a response. Are you okay? Yes. But I don't want to eat. You don't want to eat? Are you sure you're not forcing yourself? I'm not. I just need to sleep. Please leave me alone. She's a teenager. She might have things she can't easily share with her mother. I decided to let her be for the night and see how she felt. However, she didn't emerge from her room even when it was time for club activities the next morning. I prepared lunch for her and left for work, calling during the day, but she never answered. Returning home, my husband was already back and retreated to his room after stating they had finished dinner. Asking about my daughter, he replied she was fine and not to bother her. Bother her? I was puzzled but couldn't get more information as he seemed averse to discussing it further. In the kitchen, I found the lunch I prepared for her untouched and thrown away. I immediately went to check on her. "Are you really okay? Can I see you?" But she refused, saying she wanted to sleep. The next morning, she appeared even more exhausted and slightly thinner than 2 days ago. She appeared to have lost some weight. "Is it so bad you can't eat? Should we go to the hospital?" "I'm fine. I just don't feel like eating right now. I'm going to skip club activities today." I really wanted to take her to the hospital by force. But if she insists she's fine, I couldn't just drag her there against her will. Reluctantly, I respected her wish for that day. However, the situation changed the next night. When my daughter entered the bathroom without a towel, I went to deliver it and saw her in the changing area, about to undress. Startled, I apologized, but was shocked at her emaciated appearance. My daughter's body was so emaciated that it would be no exaggeration to say that she was nothing but bones and skin. "Let's go to the hospital before you bathe. It's dangerous in your condition. I'll get the car ready in the garage." "No. I don't want to go to the hospital. I chose to be this way." "Don't lie. You can't play softball in that condition." While I was trying to persuade my resistant daughter to go to the hospital, my husband appeared, saying she's fine because she said so. She says she's fine with it. At her age, she probably wants to lose weight. I countered that a wrong diet is not good for her health. My husband then asked, "You're a mother and you don't understand the female mind of your daughter at her age?" He then began to talk about me as if I were an unfit mother. A nurse would know what it's like to be in such a state, wouldn't she? How can you say that nursing is a vocation if you don't know unless you go to the hospital? His rationale kept shifting, from her being fine to him deciding what's best. As a parent and medical professional, my instinct was to take her to the hospital, even by force. But sensing my intention, my husband took the insurance cards from the drawer and left. I regretted not linking my daughter's insurance to mine. Despite the cost, I decided she needed to see a doctor. I tried convincing her with promises of a female doctor and assured her not to worry about money, but she steadfastly refused. Overwhelmed by her crying refusal, I gave in, deciding to persuade her over time. But things took a drastic turn. While I was briefly away, she bathed and collapsed. Assuming she overheated, I drove her to my hospital. Although my husband still had her insurance card, I knew we could settle the difference later. The hospital accepts credit card payments, so no matter the cost, my daughter's life is irreplaceable. I had requested female doctors for any emergencies involving my daughter, so upon our arrival, they immediately accommodated us. The diagnosis revealed she had fainted due to anemia. However, the doctor's explanation continued. Shockingly, my daughter was suffering from malnutrition. I thought she was just on a strict diet. But I always packed her nutritious lunches for school, and our meals at home were healthy. Although my husband also cooked, I did it more frequently. What was going on? Then, with tears, my daughter begged for help. I've been too scared to speak up about Dad. But I can't handle it anymore. I knew my husband had high expectations for her. But I never imagined he was enforcing them. He had set an ideal body measurement for her and was forcing her into harmful dieting practices. My pelvis is wide, and I can't slim down that area. He said I'd have to shave down my bones to get thinner. She mentioned that my husband suggested doing it himself to save hospital costs. It might sound like a joke, but for my daughter, my husband's words were absolute. dominating her reality. The reason we stopped having meals together was to conceal her extreme dieting from me. She was also discarding parts of her lunch I packed, to avoid going hungry from skipped dinners, complying with my husband's demands. Gradually losing strength, she couldn't even keep up with warm-up exercises in her club activities and felt she had no choice but to quit. Their solo trips were for attending model auditions. Though told to quit the club to avoid tanning, she used sunscreen to continue secretly. As the dieting became harsher, she reached her physical limits and couldn't maintain it. Feeling powerless against my husband, she was becoming apathetic. But she sensed it was only a matter of time before I discovered everything. However, she feared my husband wouldn't pay for her desired high school if he found out. I was ashamed of thinking my husband, who actively engaged in housework and childcare, was the ideal, supportive spouse. His involvement had ulterior motives. Crafting his version of a perfect daughter during my absence, not out of respect for my wishes. My husband saw our daughter as an object he could mold at will, igniting my fury. She is not a doll but a sentient individual, not property of her parents. Realizing he didn't understand this basic fact was utterly disillusioning. I apologized to my daughter for not noticing sooner. There were signs. Like the issues with meals and vacations. I should have asked why she didn't mind getting tanned in club activities. Instead of outright opposition, my husband subtly manipulated her to quit. I then clearly told my daughter that we would divorce her father and not to worry about her school fees. Returning to my original department and working night shifts, I was earning more than my husband, who had used up all his leave for the auditions and trips, significantly reducing his basic salary. After a night's observation in the hospital, my daughter and I returned home to find a commotion and a crowd outside. Pushing through, we saw police cars and my husband being questioned by officers. A neighbor noticed me and my daughter and told us about the situation. When my husband returns home, the house is dark and our daughter is not there. He checked his daughter's room, but since there were no signs of personal belongings taken out of the house, he thought it was a sudden runaway and started looking for her. He asked around in the neighborhood and forced his way into one house. It was the home of the daughter's childhood friend. The husband did not think well of the childhood friend, but the daughter and the other child had been very close until kindergarten. He didn't like the friend, assuming he was a girl because of his feminine appearance in his younger years. Discovering the friend was actually a boy, he raged, deeming any association too premature. Our daughter, perhaps embarrassed or feeling guilty, had kept her distance since elementary school. My husband barged into the friend's home, accusing them of hiding our daughter out of spite. But the friend had moved away years ago. Only their grandparents lived there now. His rampage led to the police being called. In talking with the officer, my husband explained that we don't want any boys on our daughter to make her a model. So he went around the house checking out. He claimed to have checked several houses, with the friends seeming most suspicious, showing no remorse. Additionally, during auditions, he was approached by an agency promising to launch her career in exchange for debt collection. In fact, it turns out that it was not a debt, but a piece of fraud. It was revealed to be a scam, and several police sketches resembling my husband had led to filed complaints.
You gotta help me out here. I did all this for the sake of my little girl. And I didn't know it was a scam.
Even if you didn't know it was a scam, if you made illegal collections, you are guilty, right? I replied coldly. I don't want a criminal father for my daughter. Divorce, I declared. My daughter would no longer be at her father's beck and call. She has never wanted to be a model. I told her that I preferred cool to cute and that I really wanted to learn Aikido and karate. To the end, my husband asked his daughter for help, saying that she would just be told to tell me to say so. However, when my daughter refused to look at my husband even once, my husband's shoulders slumped and he was taken away by the police. Later, the doctor who examined my daughter contacted the police, who also questioned my husband about his treatment of my daughter. My husband still does not admit guilt to my daughter, saying that it was an education for the child. He admitted that he had gone too far in breaking and entering, even though it was a misunderstanding, but he continues to plead justification, saying that he does not think he did anything wrong and that it is natural behavior for a parent to do. As for being a part of the fraud, he says he did not intend to do so. Even though he didn't know, the way he collected the money was so outrageous that it cannot be overlooked, and the police are investigating him even more severely. Is there a big organization behind this? The police are continuing to thoroughly investigate the case with such a viewpoint in mind. My divorce from my husband was finalized through an attorney. Neither my daughter nor I have visited my husband even once. My husband told us through his lawyer that he wanted us to come, but we didn't go because there was nothing to talk about when we showed up. After that, I received a number of letters from my husband, who had grown numb. Each letter is long, about 10 sheets of letterhead, but there's no apology and reconciliation, and the contents are similar or the same each time. While apologizing, my ex-husband's skewed expressions of affection for our daughter made her feel uneasy, saying it was creepy. I couldn't bear to read them, so I returned them, but they kept coming back, so I decided to tear them up as soon as they arrived. My in-laws gave me a very polite apology. Even after divorcing my husband, my daughter remains their grandchild. She was fond of her grandparents. They told us to ask for help anytime we needed it. But given what had happened with my husband, I vowed to live independently. Although I wouldn't stop my daughter from seeing her grandparents if she wished. Thus, my daughter and I moved out of the family home to start anew near the high school she wanted to attend. She set new goals, excelling in her studies and club activities, and seemed to have made good friends, often chatting with them in front of our house after school. 2 years later, my daughter was studying hard as usual. Thanks to a department change that eliminated overtime and night shifts, she successfully got into her desired school. Mom, thank you. What for, suddenly? You've always put me first this past year and kept a close eye on me. Isn't it your turn now? Actually, a year ago, there was talk of me being promoted to head nurse. But I declined, prioritizing my daughter's study and requested a transfer to a more flexible department. It seems she somehow heard about that conversation. I'm okay now. I've made up my mind about what I want to do and won't be swayed anymore. So, now it's your turn to fulfill your dream and save many lives. Driven by my daughter's words, I returned to my original department when she started high school. Even though there are days I don't see her due to night shifts, I'm thrilled that she helps out at home as much as she can. Coming home in the morning and eating the breakfast she made, I think about what we'll eat and talk about tonight, feeling truly happy. I will continue to watch my daughter grow up and to be a nurse like the nurse who saved my life as a young girl, and today I live firmly on 2 feet, a nurse and a mother.